The next case may well be the most difficult one that I have personally experienced. The situation was extremely difficult both to diagnose and to heal because there were almost no symptoms. I believe that only an exorcist of Father Candido's caliber and experience was able to understand something of it, even if God gave another priest the satisfaction of bringing the matter to a happy ending. Often we work without seeing any fruit, or we reap fruit where others have worked before us. What is important is that always, and in every case, we give glory to the Lord. Angelo's Calvary began in 1981, immediately after he reached the age of retirement, and lasted 7 long years. When the symptoms first appeared, everyone thought that he had an unidentified illness. This included the family doctor, who had known Angelo since his youth, and therefore was familiar not only with his various ailments, but also with his personality and behavior. It all started with a strange aversion to bathing and leaving the house. Here was a man who had always been extremely active, and who was suddenly spending his days between his bed and an easy chair. He did not feel like eating and refused to walk to the dining room, so his wife, to appease him, would set a table for him in the living room. Gradually, he refused to see even his closest friends when they came to visit him. He would just lie in bed, behind his bedroom's closed door. He neither sat up nor watched television or listened to the radio. He no longer went to church. To understand the gravity of the change in his behavior, we need to know what sort of man Angelo had been and how he had lived up to the time of his retirement. He was gifted with the brightest intellect and an extraordinary willpower, was extremely active, and his brilliant career was solely the fruit of his hard work. He had reached the top level of a job that required the utmost dedication and trustworthiness. He loved his firm, and everyone at work enjoyed talking with him. His honesty, integrity, and many other virtues earned him high esteem. Throughout his life, he had been committed to knowing and nurturing his faith. He never missed daily Mass and communion. Just one example is sufficient to show his determination to receive the Eucharist daily. Before the changes following the Second Vatican Council, the faithful were required to fast from midnight before receiving communion. Angelo, who often returned from work very late at night, refused to take even a drop of water, rather than forego communion the next morning. He was always very considerate with his wife, treating her with respect and love. Therefore, the sudden change in his personality was as radical as it was incomprehensible. His sickness progressed to the point that he no longer left his bed and stopped eating altogether. His loved ones could only coax him to drink a cup of tea and eat one slice of pineapple twice a week. From his bed of suffering, holding tightly onto a small statue of St. Michael the Archangel, he would cry out, "Help me! I can't take it anymore." Or he would forcefully shout, "Go away, you louse! Leave me in peace! I spit on you." These words evidently were directed at the evil one. In fact, he would spit with all his might against someone that he alone could see. This behavior continued for a long time. It seemed as though he had truly gone mad. At the beginning, he was diagnosed with depression, but it seemed that his condition was evolving into a form of obsession or lunacy. I may add that, given his intelligence, his good reputation, and all his apostolic commitments, retirement did not mean lack of activity for him. He was looking forward to dedicating more time to activities that were important to him. Thus, while retirement often causes depression because of the transition between hard work and inactivity, this was not Angelo's case. A long succession of neurologists were unable to cure him. They prescribed medicines of all sorts, especially psychological drugs and tranquilizers, but they only served to make him listless and lethargic. If he tried to leave the bed, he would fall on the floor, and his wife would have to lift him up almost bodily, because he was unable to help himself. One morning, Angelo was complaining and hugging the St. Michael statue as his wife and a dear friend of his, a doctor who was also a devoted Catholic, were looking on. Suddenly, the doctor turned to the woman and said, "What if he is right when he says, 'Leave me alone, or I will spit on you'?" So they decided to call the renowned diocesan exorcist, Father Candido. The doctor himself contacted the priest and drove him to Angelo's house. Seated in an easy chair, the victim welcomed the exorcist. Throughout the exorcism, he almost always kept his eyes shut, behaved with the utmost calm, and said not a word. Then he spoke very amiably with the priest. This behavior was repeated every time Father Candido went to exorcise him and to bring him communion. After the exorcisms, they talked of common acquaintances, and Angelo was articulate, kind, and completely normal. The reaction, his usual lethargy, apathy, and silence, would come afterward. The fact remained that there was no noticeable improvement. His wife's discouragement reached its peak when he, who used to attend daily Mass, categorically refused to attend Christmas Mass. The family called another exorcist, a friend. The reaction was the same: utmost calm, devout reception of communion, final conversation, and no changes. Every time the exorcist left, Angelo would furiously accuse his wife. "Did you call the exorcist? Now you'll see what happens to you." In fact, she began to experience all sorts of misfortunes. Once she fell and broke her nose. Again, she fell on an old sheet of metal and sustained a cut that missed her eye by a miracle. Another time, she broke her ankle. Again, while getting out of her car, she felt a strong push that almost threw her under a passing car. Instead, she escaped with such a severe shoulder injury that it still bothers her after many years of physical therapy. Then this second exorcist became seriously ill and could no longer visit Angelo. His wife heard of a priest in Tuscany who, besides being an exorcist, had a special charism for healing. Angelo agreed to visit him because, at the time, he had a severe sore throat that he feared was caused by cancer. The priest immediately said, "Forget cancer. This is nothing more than the devil's work. If you remain in the area for 1 month, I can help you." With difficulty, Angelo resisted for 8 days. His desperate wife went to the priest, and he comforted her with these words: "Take him home. You will have to come back, but do not say anything, and do not answer him if he speaks." The warning was timely. Angelo became unbearably arrogant. In the years that followed, he would insult his wife using vulgar language, but she remained firm in her resolve to keep silent. Once, at Father Candido's urging, I went to visit him and performed a 40-minute, full exorcism. I still remember him, calmly seated in his easy chair, silent, with very kind parting words. Still, I obtained nothing. Angelo's physical suffering increased, and he visited many doctors in Italy and abroad in hope of a cure. No doctor ever diagnosed his disease, and no medicine ever helped him. For instance, once he complained of an unbearable pain in his eyes. They felt full of water. 18 ophthalmologists could do nothing for him. His wife continued to encourage him to visit the priest in Tuscany, but Angelo firmly refused every time. At the end of her rope, she went by herself, and the priest calmed her fears with these words: "Be at peace. This time he will come. Tell him that I wait for him next month." When she repeated these words to Angelo, he replied, "Prepare my suitcase. I go immediately." Suddenly, he was full of energy again. He seemed a different person. He traveled alone and remained in a small hotel in Tuscany for 1 month. On his return, he was the same person he had been 7 years before: kind, affectionate, concerned. When asked for an explanation, he would only say, "You know, he is no longer here." When he was, he would give me no peace. After this, he lived peacefully for a few more weeks. Then he went to the father's house with a smile on his lips. After Angelo's death, Father Candido and I spoke about him several times. I wanted answers to some puzzling questions. First, How did the exorcist understand that he was in the presence of demonic possession, since the victim never reacted during exorcisms? There is no doubt that Father Candido, in light of his vast experience, was able to evaluate the various elements of the case. A sudden change, and a particular aversion to all that involved prayer and the sacraments. The clinical tests and related diagnosis, or lack thereof, of so many physicians. The particular nature of the constant demonic attacks to which Angelo was subjected, and that he kept trying to control, thanks to his deep faith and strong. Finally, during the exorcisms, Father Candido was able to sense a presence that to him was all too familiar, despite the absence of visible reactions. All these considerations became very useful to me when I faced a similar case. Then, I was also trying to understand the motive, the initial cause of Angelo's evil sickness. He had not taken any false steps, such as visits to magicians or spiritualist sessions. Nothing pointed to a malefice. The most probable cause, even if we could not be certain, seemed to be Satan's revenge for the vast amount of good that Angelo had accomplished throughout his life. God permitted this trial as a means of additional purification, to prepare him for the great, final meeting with his Savior, when he would finally receive the reward promised to his faithful servants. I had one final doubt. How was it possible that the Tuscan exorcist liberated Angelo with relative ease, when his exorcist friend and Father Candido were unable to do so? Here again, the Lord is the key. Obviously, he wanted Angelo to undertake that particular journey of purification. In addition, even though all the exorcisms seemed fruitless, they always provided some relief and allowed the victim to receive many sacraments, in particular communion and reconciliation, that otherwise would have been denied him, and that sustained him in his trial. When all is said and done, the Lord used whomever he wanted for the final liberation. St. Paul would say that this prevents anyone from boasting about anything other than the Lord. Some biographical data. Angelo Battisti, the victim of whom I have written, worked in the state secretariat. He had been administrator and first president of the Casa Sollievo della Sofferenza House for relief of suffering, founded by Padre Pio, of whom he was an intimate friend. His demonic possession lasted from 1981 to 1988. The exorcist whom the Lord used to deliver him was Father Angelo Fantoni of Monte San Savino, Arezzo, who is now deceased.